Welcome back to Philosopherse podcast, where we explore the mysteries of the universe, one thought-provoking topic at a time. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating philosophical debate that has captivated thinkers for over a century: the limits of language. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. The limits of language is a truly captivating topic and one that has challenged philosophers for centuries. It's a question that goes to the heart of how we understand the world and ourselves. We use language to express our thoughts, to build relationships, and to make sense of the world around us. But what happens when language itself seems to fail us? What are the limitations of this powerful tool we use every day?
It's a topic that feels incredibly relevant to our lives today, with the way we communicate constantly evolving. We're bombarded with information, and it seems like the meaning of words is constantly shifting. It's almost like we're living in a world where language itself is becoming more complex and challenging to navigate. And with the rise of social media and the internet, it feels like we're constantly encountering new ways of using language, new forms of communication, and even new ways of thinking. So, to start, could you give us a quick overview of the key figures and ideas that sparked this debate?
Certainly. The early 20th century saw a dramatic shift in philosophical thought, marked by the rise of logical positivism and the decline of traditional metaphysics. This period saw a profound interest in the nature of language and its relationship to reality. Logical positivism, emphasizing empirical verification and scientific methods in philosophy, challenged traditional metaphysics, which focused on abstract concepts and speculative reasoning. This intellectual climate provided fertile ground for the emergence of Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein, both pioneers of analytic philosophy, who sought to clarify the nature of language and its limitations.
That's a lot to unpack. It sounds like we're dealing with some pretty fundamental questions about how language works. Could you explain what makes language so fascinating to philosophers?
Language is a remarkable tool. It allows us to express thoughts, ideas, and emotions, and to build complex relationships with others. But it also presents us with a unique challenge. How do words relate to the world? What does it mean for a word to have meaning? These are questions that have puzzled philosophers for centuries.
So, we're talking about the nature of meaning itself. Is there a single, universally accepted definition of what it means for a word to have meaning?
That's a great question, and one that has been debated for centuries. There are various theories of meaning, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. Let's start with the referential theory. This theory posits that meaning is determined by the object a word refers to. So, the word cat would refer to the actual animal. Think of it like a label pointing to a specific thing in the world.
So, if I point to a cat and say cat, the word is directly connected to that specific animal.
Exactly, but this theory has limitations. What about words like justice or love? Can you point to a specific object that represents these concepts?
That's a good point. So, what about the conceptual theory?
The conceptual theory suggests that meaning is determined by the concept a word evokes. This means that the word cat would evoke the concept of a feline creature in our minds. It's not just about the physical animal, but the whole idea of what a cat is.
So, it's more about the mental image we have in our minds.
Exactly. But this theory also has its limitations. Concepts can be subjective and vary from person to person. What one person thinks of as justice might be different from what another person thinks.
So, it sounds like we need a theory that takes into account the context in which words are used.
That's where the use theory comes in. This theory argues that meaning is determined by how a word is used in a specific context. The meaning of the word cat would depend on how it is used in a particular sentence or conversation. For example, the cat sat on the mat is different from that cat is a real handful.
So, the meaning of a word can change depending on how it's used. That's fascinating. So, how did Russell and Wittgenstein approach these questions?
Russell, a prominent figure in logical positivism, believed that language could be used to accurately represent the world through logical analysis. He aimed to develop a language that would be free from ambiguity and capable of expressing all truths about reality. His work, particularly Principia Mathematica, sought to demonstrate the power of logic to analyze and understand the world. This approach, however, relied heavily on a correspondence theory of truth, which posits that truth is a matter of correspondence between language and reality.
So Russell believed that language could be a perfect mirror of reality.
That's a simplified way of putting it. He believed that through careful logical analysis, we could create a language that would accurately reflect the world. Think of it like a perfect map that captures every detail of a territory.
But wouldn't that be a very complicated map?
It would be incredibly complex, and that's where the critics come in. This view has been criticized for its potential to lead to the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, assuming that language directly mirrors reality. Critics argue that Russell's focus on logical analysis and correspondence with reality overlooks the multifaceted nature of language, including its role in shaping thought, expressing emotions, and creating social bonds.
So Russell's approach might be too rigid. It doesn't account for all the ways language is actually used.
Exactly. Wittgenstein, on the other hand, rejected the idea of a single universal language. His later work, particularly Philosophical Investigations, argued that language is a tool for communication within specific language games, and that meaning is determined by the context in which words are used. This approach, known as a used theory of meaning, emphasizes the role of language in social practices and communication.
So Wittgenstein saw language as more fluid and flexible depending on the situation.
Yes, he saw language as a tool that is constantly evolving and adapting to different contexts. He argued that the meaning of a word is not inherent in the word itself, but rather emerges from its use in a particular language game. Think of it like a game of chess, where the meaning of each move depends on the rules of the game and the strategies of the players. The meaning of a word, according to Wittgenstein, is determined by its role in a particular language game, a specific context or social practice. For example, in the word game itself has different meanings depending on the context. A game of chess is different from a game of tag, and both are different from a game of poker.
That's a really interesting perspective. So, if language is so flexible, how can we ever be sure that we're understanding each other?
That's a question that both Russell and Wittgenstein grappled with. Russell, with his focus on logic and correspondence, but believed that we could achieve clarity and precision through careful analysis. Wittgenstein, however, argued that language is inherently ambiguous and that we can only achieve understanding through shared practices and conventions. It's through our shared experiences and cultural background that we develop a common understanding of language. And even then, misunderstandings can arise, especially in complex or nuanced situations.
So, it sounds like they both recognize the limitations of language, but in different ways. Could you summarize their key differences?
Certainly. Russell believed that language is limited by the inherent complexity of reality, while Wittgenstein believed that language is limited by its inherent contextuality. Both philosophers agreed that language is a powerful tool for communication and understanding. However, they disagreed about the nature of meaning, the relationship between language and reality, and the possibility of a universal language.
That's a lot to think about. So, what are the implications of this debate for us today?
This debate has profound implications for our understanding of communication, knowledge, and the nature of reality. It raises fundamental questions about the nature of meaning, the nature of truth, and the relationship between language and reality. These questions remain open for ongoing philosophical inquiry. For example, the debate between Russell and Wittgenstein has implications for our understanding of how language shapes our thoughts and perceptions. It raises questions about the role of language in shaping our understanding of the world, our relationships with others, and our sense of self. It also has implications for our understanding of how language is used in different contexts, such as science, law, and politics. The debate also has implications for fields like artificial intelligence and computer science, as we try to create machines that can understand and use language. And of course, it has implications for our understanding of the human condition itself, how we think, how we communicate, and how we make sense of the world around us.
This is such a fascinating discussion. It's amazing to think about how much our understanding of language has evolved and how these questions continue to be relevant today. And it makes me think about how important it is to be aware of the limits of language, to be critical of the information we encounter, and to be mindful of the ways in which language can be used to shape our thoughts and perceptions.
Indeed. The debate between Russell and Wittgenstein reminds us that language is a complex and dynamic tool, and that its limitations are as important to consider as its potential.
It's interesting to think about how these debates continue to shape our understanding of language even today, especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with information and new ways of communicating.
Absolutely. The questions they raised about the nature of meaning, the relationship between language and reality, and the limitations of language are as relevant today as they were a century ago.
Thank you so much for helping us explore this fascinating topic. It's clear that the limits of language are a complex and ever-evolving issue. We're left with more questions than answers, but that's what makes philosophy so intriguing.
It's a pleasure to have been part of this conversation. Remember, the journey of understanding is never truly finished. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what we think we know.
Thank you for joining us on Philosopher's podcast. Until next time, keep thinking.